Okay. When you find litter up here at the podium, I'm the guy who did it. It's a good start. I'm an alcoholic. My home group is the Thursday night study group in Fort Lauderdale, and my name is Brian. Brian. I'm going to take this off because it's going to get warm. I can tell already. Never know. Let's put the steps out there so I can remember what they are. All right. Privileged to be here. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Nancy, for asking. I've never been in this room. I've been in this club several times. I think less than maybe 4 times. And it's the first time I've ever been in. This is the middle room, right? Is this the middle room? Yeah, it's the first time I've been in the middle room. This is a beautiful place. Hi, forgive me because I'm always. I've been sober a little while, and I've had lots of opportunities to speak in front of crowds at Alcoholics Anonymous. But one thing that's never really gotten any easier is doing it and not being nervous. So I'm always like nervous for the first, 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, maybe by the end of the 12 steps it'll be 1 minute. But I've never spoken in AA and not been nervous. So bear with me for just a couple of minutes. I want to talk about a couple of things though before we ever get to my story or step 1. The speak up above the clock. Is that to tell you folks in the back to speak up when you're sharing, or is that to tell you to speak up when the meeting's supposed to be over and I'm still talking? Do we know which? The latter? Okay, all right. Point that out now instead of later. My time is up already. I know that the absence of profanity offends nobody, but I insist on offending some. I'm not going to be the most profane speaker you've ever heard, but it's going to be hard for me to get through some things without a little profanity. Come on, just a little. I'm thrilled to be here. I owe my life to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a dead man if it isn't for AA, and I just. I owe AA so much, and I get to live, for a guy like me, coming from where I came from, doing what I was doing, to be sitting in a room with fellow members of Alcoholics Anonymous talking about the 12 steps is the furthest I would have ever thought I would have been when I got here. And it's an absolute honor and a privilege for me because my whole life today is a miracle. There's no chance that I am on track for the life that I get to live today. When I get to Alcoholics Anonymous, this is a dream. As a matter of fact, pretty much everything that I have in my life today is an absolute miracle, given where I've come from. Nor is any of it what I would have expected or probably even wanted. But I am far happier now than I ever would have imagined I'd be, clean and sober for as long as I've been. So I'm thrilled to be able to do this. I'm thrilled to have friends here to share it with and to keep me honest, as Ed says. And we're going to go through the steps one at a time, I imagine. Is that kind of the deal? It won't double up any, maybe, who knows. 12 weeks, all right. Yeah, by the time we get to 6, you'll be like, can you double up some? No. I'm going to be repetitive, probably. I've done a few of these. I'm a big book guy. I'm not really a step series guy, I think, but obviously I keep getting asked to do it, so maybe I'm wrong. I'm repetitive, especially with respect to the first few steps. I did not get step 1 until I was sober a couple of years. And I think that's an egregious error. I think, I just can't get this where I want it, so I'm just going to leave it alone for right now. It's an egregious error because I certainly was an alcoholic. I just didn't know what that really meant. I really didn't know what it meant to be powerless over alcohol. When I got here, I was absolutely certain that I could never drink again. Let me start a little differently. Let me start with an apology. Okay, I know that we're in AA. Okay, I'm crystal clear about that. And had I known that I would eventually be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I never would have smoked crack. I would have left it alone. I mean, especially if I'd have known how touchy some of you folks would be about it. If I'd have known I was heading to AA, I would have touched it. And I don't mention it out of any disrespect for Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a real alcoholic. I'm not a drug addict who's getting clean in AA. I'm a real alcoholic, but I'm also a drug addict. And it's a little hard to understand how a 19-year-old comes to Alcoholics Anonymous and is absolutely done, right? Because we have something in common. You're both starting young. Hopefully you'll stay. I did. I was fortunate that I stayed. But I stayed I almost didn't get that chance because I really wasn't clear about step one. And when I got here, I was crystal clear that I couldn't use drugs anymore and I couldn't drink anymore. And I was crystal clear that if I did, my life was heading for hell and more trouble. But I found out a couple of years into this deal, that's not the same thing as admitting that I'm powerless over alcohol and that my life is unmanageable. And so I'll tell you really a lot of my story up front, and then we'll do a lot more steps in the weeks to come. But to me, my story is really about how I came to understand that I was powerless over alcohol and that my life is unmanageable. And so this is going to be a lot of my story. February 24th of 1988, I had my last drink and drug. I was arrested in DeKalb County, Georgia. I weighed 125 pounds. I don't know if any of you sized me up as I came in. I am 6'3" tall, and I don't look good at 125 pounds. I'm 265, I hope, still right now. Now, I'm not saying I look good at 265, but at 125 pounds, I'm almost dead. And so that's why I apologize up front, because it's a little hard. How does a 19-year-old get in that? I'm not going to get there just drinking, that's for sure. So here's the thing. That was my last, and there was a definite change on that day in how I communicated about what was going on. Because from that point forward, I was not talking about not drinking when I got out, not using drugs when I got out. I was not talking about that. I was crystal clear on that day that I was going to drink and get high when I got out, and I was crystal clear that there was nothing that I could do about it. Absolutely powerless over alcohol and drugs, and knew it. Didn't know what that meant, but I knew it. So step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become manageable. That's the first time I ever remember knowing that I was powerless over alcohol. And I didn't know it. I didn't know what step one was, and I didn't have that context. But that's clearly, as I look back on it, when I admitted that I was powerless over alcohol and drugs, that my life was unmanageable. Every other time, and so here's so for 2 years prior, 2 years plus a little bit, from the time I was 16 years old, basically the trouble I was getting into was worse and worse. And here's what my story looks like from 16 to this day in February of 1988. I drink too much, I get out of control, I end up in jail. I swear I'm never going to touch another drop. I get out, I stay sober for a few days, for a few weeks, maybe even a month, and then I drink, and then I drink too much, and then I end up in jail. And this is going on. And the only thing that's changing about this story for me is that the time in jail is getting a little longer each time, and the time out of jail is getting a little shorter each time. It's the only thing that's changing about that story. But every single time, every single time I would wake up on the concrete floor of the Broward County Jail swearing that I will never do this again. This is absolutely crazy. I'm not going to touch another drop, right? And I'm sure the first time that I told that story, hey, David, I'm sure that the very first time that I told that story, it was like, oh, I'm not going to smoke crack anymore. I'm still going to smoke pot and drink or, whatever. But I was a smart kid. By the time I was 17 years old, I figured out that if I took even a single drink, this was going to be a recurring episode. And so I was absolutely convinced I could not touch a single drop. And yet they would let me out. And within weeks, I'd be drinking again. And it didn't matter how bad the consequences were or how bad the consequences I was still facing were. It was never enough to keep me from taking the first drink. I absolutely was powerless over that. But every time, the story that rang out from me as I woke up on the cold concrete floor of the Broward County Jail was, I am never going to touch another drop. Well, in February of 1988, that changed. I could not tell myself that. I couldn't even convince myself of it. I could not even muster up, I'm never going to, I just couldn't even say that to myself. I had basically convinced myself that was an impossible task. I'm 19 years old. And the prospect of staying sober was an impossible task. I could not even muster up the courage to even speak those words to myself again. And so I said that I was absolutely going to get drunk and high when I got out. I mean, I knew I was going to get drunk and high when I got out, so I wasn't even going to bother to try. Now, there's a couple of things that are a little ironic about that. One, I've never had a drink or a drug since. And two, what was the second one? I forget. There was the second one, I swear. I promise you there was a second one.
Melvin.
Huh? No. Shh. What was the second one? I'm right. I'm going to forget it. As soon as I forget it, I'll come back to it. So I never had another drink or drug. And I'm in this jail in Georgia. Now, you got to know something about me. I was raised Catholic. I am not like a Catholic. I don't go to church. I don't, Catholicism was something that my parents made me do when I was growing up, kind of like school. I wouldn't have gone to school, As a matter of fact, I dropped out of school, I was dropped out for a month before my mom ever knew. Oh, that poor woman when she found out. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, my brothers and I figured out that if we made life really, really impossible on Sunday mornings for our parents, they would leave us home instead of taking us to church. This wasn't a conspiracy. We never had a discussion about it, but you could count on us being absolutely out of control on Sunday mornings, and they would leave us home. So whatever a 12 or a 13-year-old knows about the subject of God growing up in a Catholic church is what I know on February 24th, 1988, when I go to jail in DeKalb County, Georgia. It's still the same thing, right? I still have this 12-year-old's perspective of this topic. And part of the reason for that is because I don't care about that topic. That topic does not interest me. I'm not pro or con. You believe in God? Hey, that's great. I will talk to you instead. It's not a topic that I weigh in on pro or con or even have any interest in discussing. I know that I'm ignorant on the subject. But here was this man, Melvin Boston, who I would ordinarily avoid. Melvin is this guy who I would avoid. But Melvin was this peculiar figure to me. Melvin was a guy who... So in the couple of years that I've been bouncing in and out of jail, there was a couple of things I learned about surviving in jail. And, you size the environment up and you size the people up. And Melvin is the guy who is usually running the most game. He's clearly the biggest, toughest guy in this, it's a 20-man dorm with 45 men in it probably, it's like that. And he's clearly the biggest, toughest guy in the bunch, yet he's the quietest. He's the one running the least amount of game. He is just, he comes out every evening and just dates this story a little bit, but you already know the dates. So, he would come out every evening around 7 o'clock to watch back-to-back episodes of Cheers on television. And other than that, the other notable things about him is he was quiet and that he would have these little Bible studies around his bunk and he would have these little prayer, sessions with some of the guys. And that was it. So, but that's enough. That's all I need to know. I don't really have anything in common with Melvin. There's really no reason for me to talk to him because I already know what he's about. He's about my least favorite subject in the world, God. Could care less. To this day, I don't know why in the hell I was talking to Melvin. It's absolutely absurd that I was ever even having a conversation with the man. But Melvin told me a story about what his life was like when he was addicted to drugs and alcohol, the miracle that God had created in his life, and what his life was like now since he'd been clean and sober. And I don't know how long he was clean and sober, but it sounded like a long time when he told me. And I'd never heard a story like that. I just never heard a story like that. And so when Melvin tells me that story, I think, oh my God, maybe it's possible if God could do that for Melvin, maybe it's possible that God could do that for me. And it was the first time I ever believed that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Now, I have no idea what step 2 is. I have no idea about any of this stuff. But looking back on it with what I know now, that's clearly the first time I ever believed that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I was to spend 6 months in that jail cell. And the most instructive thing about those 6 months is that I visited 5 different jail cells. Now, model inmates don't change jail cells. So I was as much trouble in jail, clean and sober, as I was out of jail on drugs and alcohol, okay? Just that's instructive, right? Because the problem isn't necessarily drugs and alcohol, right? It's what's going on in here. And so that's what's going on. Now I met Melvin my first week in that jail, right? And he told me that story when my first, maybe 10 days or something like that. I mean, I had a difficult time my first week in that jail, but maybe 10 days or within 2 weeks at least, he tells me this story. And it's after that I am getting in all this trouble and they're moving me around from cell to cell because I keep getting into fights and having problems with people. And at the end of 6 months, they dropped the felony charges that I was being held on. They pled guilty to some misdemeanors, and they shackled me up and brought me back to Broward County, where I had violated felony probation. And they gave me a 2-year prison sentence. At the time, and if you're new to AA and you came here this way, close your ears because you're not going to like to hear this, but at the time, I was supposed to do 3 months on the 2 years. It's just the way that it worked then. Now I guess they got to do like 85 or more % of their sentence. I was supposed to do 3 months on the 2 years, but of course I did 6 because model inmates don't do twice as much time as they're supposed to do. But I'm as much trouble in prison, clean and sober, as I am outside on drugs and alcohol. And if it wasn't for the fact that they stuck me in a treatment center in this institution, because here's what happens. So during the time that I'm in jail and prison, I come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. It's got nothing to do with AA, by the way. It has to do with something else, right? But I followed Melvin to church, and they sent me a Bible, and I joined Melvin's little prayer and Bible study group, and you guys have seen that before. And I thought it was, I didn't know how cliche it was to go to jail and become saved. I mean, if I'd have known that, I probably wouldn't have signed up. But that's basically what happened. And so by the time I'm in this prison, still having all the same problems, just not drinking and using, I pretty much, I know that I already have my answer, though. Now, it's crystal clear to everyone in this room already that I don't, there's no way, I'm no way close to having an answer to the things that are my problem. But to me, I knew that God would keep me clean and sober, and I knew that if I just did what Melvin did, which was when I got out, I was going to find a church, I was going to get involved in ministry, and that was going to be my deal. Despite the fact that I've visited 6 different jail cells during 6 different jail cells, or 5 and 6 months in Georgia, and have doubled my prison sentence because of my behavior in Florida, totally unaware of how that has anything to do with the other. And they stick me in the drug treatment center in this prison. I have no intention of coming to AA. None whatsoever of going to any 12-step program on my release. And thank God for me, they did not They started this drug treatment center at about the same time that I got there, and they stuck me in this drug treatment center. And this drug treatment program, I learned about 12-step programs, and I learned about addiction, and it was a typical treatment. It was center that was run by folks on the outside for people in the inside, and that was my introduction to coming to AA. I had no way I'm even here except for that. And here's the thing. That's probably maybe not a big deal. I know a lot of people in the program who've clean and sober for a long time who didn't get clean and sober on their first time. But I weighed 125 pounds when they arrested me on February 24th of 1988. I don't know what happens to me if I get arrested the next time weighing 123. I don't think I get arrested weighing 123 pounds. I think I'm dead before they get a chance to arrest me at 123 pounds. So on the track that I was going, as things were going, I was clearly, this was the last stop for me. And so thank God they interrupted my plans for staying clean and sober with this treatment center. Now, I got out of treatment on March 9th, 1989. Went to my first meeting on March 10th, 1989. My first meeting outside. Obviously, I went to some meetings inside. There were some nice people in the area who brought meetings into the prison. That was really nice. But on the outside, it was my first meeting. I was on March 10th, and on March 10th, I'm walking up to my first AA meeting. I'm a little nervous, right? I mean, and so I'm more than nervous. I'm scared shitless. There's the first one. So yeah, I owe the jar a dime or a penny or a dollar. So you got to know this. You got to understand this. So I'm crystal clear when I got arrested that there's no way that I'm ever going to stay clean and sober. And somehow or another, this conversation with Melvin interrupts that. And then I end up in a treatment center, which interrupts that. And now I'm on my way out of prison. They give me $100 and a bus fare back to Broward County from Brevard. And the whole bus ride home, there's this conversation going on in my head about every other time. I'm remembering every other time I've left jail swearing I'm never going to use again, I'm never going to drink again, always having that ripped out from under me within 30 days, right? So this is a prevalent conversation. So here I am now, a year clean and sober, on my way back to Broward County. I'm with a plan, for sure. I have a plan. This is a better plan than I've ever had before by any stretch of the imagination, but still plagued by every other time I said I was going to do this, and it's never happened. I was scared shitless. I was honestly, we inventory fear in AA as a liability. I promise you, in March of 1989, fear was an asset. Because if I wasn't scared to death that I was going to drink and use and screw up this possibility of getting clean and sober, I wouldn't have done the things that they had suggested that I did. And they suggested that I go to a meeting and find a home group in my first week and find a sponsor in my first week. And there's this I had a whole, page, a legal sized page of relapse prevention stuff that I was supposed to do on a regular basis. And I'm sure I didn't do it all 100%, but I did much more of it, much better than I ever would have if I wasn't scared to death that this was not going to work. And so when I show up in AA in March of 1989, I walk, past and get introduced to a couple of people, at the door. I get in the room and I meet a guy named Bruce, who's instructive in multiple ways in my sobriety, even though he was never my sponsor and never took me through any steps. Bruce recognizes me right away as a newcomer. Bruce is all over this AA thing. Like, he's got it covered, man. Bruce is like Captain AA. He's this guy. Like every meeting I go to, he's there. He's not just there. He's not like taking up a chair. He's there early, helping them set up. He's there late, helping them clean up. He's greeting new people at the door. He recognized me right away. He knew I'd never been there before and immediately came up to me and introduced himself, made me feel welcome, got out of me that I just got out of prison the day before, and this was my first meeting on the outside. He gave me a book that I still have today that some member had left behind. He was all over this thing. And Bruce picked up his 1-year medallion that very month. Now, I picked up my white chip. So I want to always be careful about how I say this, because sometimes people take everything that a speaker says as a suggestion. I'm not saying this part as a suggestion to anybody. I'm saying it's what I did because I was scared to death that this wouldn't work. And I was scared to death that if I came to AA and picked up a one-year medallion, because I was a year clean and sober when I got here, that I wouldn't get what newcomers got. And I thought that probably would be a mistake. And I don't know where I got that pearl of wisdom. Nobody suggested it to me. Nobody told me that. I just figured if I didn't pick up chips, that people wouldn't know I was new and I wouldn't get treated as a new. Somehow or another, I just intuitively knew to do that, or maybe it came from somewhere else. So I picked up my chips. So Bruce picks up his one-year medallion that month, and Bruce is like all over this thing. He was our secretary when I first went to the group. He became our intergroup rep. He organized our group picnics, and he was, he would always throw my bike in his van and take me home if it was raining, or because I didn't have a driver's license for several years. Or if we went to the meeting, after the meeting it was dark, he would always offer to take me home, and it's just he was just my I don't know. I can't say enough about him, except that, a year later, I pick up my one-year medallion. Bruce picks up his two-year medallion the same month. And within a few months, Bruce drinks. Now, Bruce never stops doing all this. Never stops doing all the stuff that I've just mentioned to you. It never stopped. And yet, after he picked up his two-year medallion, he got drunk within a few months. And it just absolutely... The bottom came out of my faith in AA. That's what happened to me. And not only did the bottom come out of my faith in AA, but I didn't know that had happened. I had no clue. All I knew is that I went from somebody who was going to meetings on a regular basis, meeting with his sponsor, doing all the things that AA suggested, to somebody who wouldn't listen to anybody and didn't give a shit about anything. And did not have any awareness of why or how that had happened, had no understanding that the bottom came out of my faith in AA and in God and staying clean and sober. The only thing that I didn't stop doing is I did not stop going to meetings. I was going to very few of them, but I did not stop going to meetings. And I went from a guy who was looking at the hopeful possibility of staying sober, in AA and doing everything that I could, to somebody who was really, really struggling and was working my way out of AA. Now, you couldn't have told me that was what was happening, but it was obvious to everybody in AA who knows and loves people in AA that was what was happening. And of course, one of the signs that was what was happening, I was, they tell you to stay away from newcomers and not get in relationships in your first year. I think it's on page 78 of the big book. No, it's not. Don't look there. But it's a suggestion. It's a common suggestion. It's not a bad suggestion. Not you two, if you're already in one. It's cool. You're covered. Your grandfather did. I had enough self-respect, enough respect for my own sobriety to stay out of relationships for my first year. But now that Bruce is drunk, I've lost faith in AA. The bottom has come out of my hope and faith in God and AA and this whole. I just couldn't make sense of this anymore. I couldn't understand how somebody like Bruce could participate the way he participated and drink, and how I was supposed to stay sober doing the same thing. It just didn't make any sense to me. I just couldn't understand it. It just didn't jive. And so now I'm dating a girl with a week of sobriety. And there were a lot of really good AAs who tried to interrupt that. Our friends, particularly in our home group, and who tried to interrupt that and tried to get in the way of that, and of course unsuccessfully. But that was where my head was at. So I went from this guy who was doing everything I was supposed to do to somebody who had very little regard for suggestions and what people in AA had to say. I really didn't. It's funny because when I was brand new to AA, everything that anybody said in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous was like this nugget of gold that I could take to the bank, and it was and it was good stuff that I was hearing for the first time, and it was, and now I don't believe any of you. about anything. I can't, it doesn't make any sense to me anymore, and I don't believe you anymore, and so I'm not following the suggestions, and I'm very often doing the opposite of them. And, this girl, so let me fill you in on a little detail before I continue with the story about this girl. Okay. So I come to Alcoholics Anonymous as a 20-year-old. I got sober at 19 in jail. I come to Alcoholics Anonymous as a 20-year-old. I'm now probably 21 years old. And even before Bruce drinks, there's a couple of things that you need to know about a typical 21-year-old in AA. Maybe I'm a typical 21-year-old. I don't know at the time, maybe. First of all, I was the youngest person that I knew in AA. I think I was 23 before I met somebody in AA younger than me. But now that's like we got young people in AA all the time, much younger than me, starting out in AA. I remember. Never mind. We don't have time for that story. So as a young person in AA, there was a couple of things about AA that even when I was doing well, even when I was on the, following suggestions and doing what I was told, even when I was that guy, there was two things that I never got clear about and really didn't like too much, and didn't relate to and couldn't find any value in. And those two things were old timers, and the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, and big book thumpers in particular, people who like the big book, and people who know me are laughing right now because I've got some time in AA and I'm a big book thumper, I think I understand. I mean, I don't have a clear memory of every thought that I had when I was a 21-year-old, but I think I understand why that was so. As a person in AA, as a young person in AA who was also had other addictions, every old timer's story sounded a little bit similar to me. They sounded like people who had it all together, were doing really, really good, and then alcohol started ripping it away from them, right? They had families and careers and jobs and stuff, and then as their drinking progressed, they had nothing, and their family left, and their kids wouldn't talk to them, and they lost their job, and they sold their house, and that's kind of the story. And maybe not all of them had to go all the way down, but that's kind of the story. They were these people who had it all together, and then alcohol cut them down. And of course, I don't relate to that story whatsoever. I never lost everything because of my drinking. Of course, I never got anything because of my drinking, right? I mean, but I didn't lose it all because I didn't have this successful life that was going really great and had it all cut down. So their story. Now I know. Like one of the things you're going to hear as a new person in AA, you're going to hear you're supposed to identify and not compare. And I understand that that's what I was doing. I was comparing my life to theirs and not identifying with what they were going through, and because the feelings would be very similar. But I heard that. Like I heard you should identify and not compare. But I don't know that that's what you call what I'm doing. Right? So that instruction is just lost on me because I don't even connect those two dots. Like I don't know that that's what I'm doing. Big book thumpers were another breed because to me AA was chill. You come in, you have a meeting, you talk about stuff, and you got to know, I went to mostly open discussion meetings. I did not go to step meetings and big book meetings. I avoided step meetings and big book meetings. I had a sponsor, and we were going through steps, but I wasn't this person who was like, hanging on every word in our textbooks, going, oh, this is, that's not what it was for me. To me, AA was this place where we went, we talked about stuff, we shared before the meeting, after the meeting, and it was very social. And my picture of what this was a place where we go and help each other and talk to each other so that we can stay sober one day at a time. That's my picture of what AA is. I have no clue what AA really is. And I find out later. And so big book numbers were always a real damper to this mindset about Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Because they were always coming in like, no, you got to do it this way, you got to follow this through, you got to do it in this amount of time, you got to, and they just seemed so like. But such a ripple in the smooth, and it never jived with me. I never liked it, and with some exceptions. Every now and again, I would go to a meeting and listen to a speaker who really knew some stuff about the big, like what he shared about what he learned out of something he read in the big book, I would go, oh my God, I'm going to go home. I got that book at home. I'm going to go read that, and I would go home and I would open the big book, and I would start to read it. War fever ran high in this New England town where we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned. Done. No more interest in the big book whatsoever. I could get to page 2 and I would fall asleep. And to me, the only thing the big book was good for was to help me go to sleep, like most books at the time. I don't know. But I'm dating this newcomer. And some idiot in AA, I know who it was. His name's Greg. I haven't seen him in decades. But he was, he was always trying to get with my girlfriend too. And he, somehow or another, he put a bug in her ear about going to a thing called a big book seminar. Now, have any of you ever been to a big book seminar? If you've been to a big book seminar, raise your hand. Oh, so a lot of you have been to a big book seminar. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, a big book seminar is this like thing where you go and for 4 days, you listen to 2 old-timers talk about the freaking big book, right? And some idiot in AA convinced her this would be a good idea, right? Going to this thing would be a good idea. I was not on board. But she was cute. And I was there. And I'm sitting in a big book seminar. I swear to God, this is how it happens. We sign up for the big book seminar because it's like 3 months away. And I know by the time it comes around, she will have lost interest. She will have forgot about this thing, and we can just forget about it. But no. Just weeks before the event happens, the idiot who ran the thing sent this packet in the mail, right? And she comes home and gets the mail on her way. Yeah, we're living together at 3 months. Because that makes sense too, right? This is like a window, like this, like there's a window into the real problem that I've been trying to carry you through the whole time, right? There's a serious problem going on here. And she's giddy. Like she brings this thing home and she's ripping it apart. And it's got the schedule and the events and she's giddy about going to this thing. I don't understand. I don't understand how anybody opens this package, looks at what this is, and is happy and thrilled about this thing coming out. It just does not make any sense to me. So I end up at a big book seminar. Now I show up at a big book seminar. I don't have a big book. I don't have a 12 and 12. I don't have a highlighter. I don't have a pen, a piece of paper. I have nothing, right? She's got this tote bag. Big books, 12 and 12s. Highlighters, pens, notepads. For both of us, right? Nobody in here knows anything about that, I'm sure. But for both of us. And we're sitting down, and we get there sometime on Thursday afternoon, and Joe and Charlie are talking about the doctor's opinion. And they're reading from the big book, and they're reading about allergy of the body and obsession of the mind. How an alcoholic, when he takes a drink, his body responds with a physical craving, making him abnormal. Normal drinkers don't have this experience. How an alcoholic has a different reaction to the substance alcohol. Their bodies metabolize alcohol in a way that causes them to crave more alcohol once they have a drink, or once they have 2 drinks, or however many they need in order to trigger that craving. And how that phenomenon separates them from the average normal drinker. And that despite that fact and evidence of that fact, they have another problem. And that their mind tells them just before they take a drink that it's okay. That you're not going to go to jail this time. You're not going to wreck the car this time. You're not going to bankrupt your checking account. Your mother and father are going to be great with it. like whatever they have to tell you. Like there's zero evidence that I can take a drink and have things turn out okay. Zero evidence. Yet just before taking a drink, I think it's going to be perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, no one else is even going to know. An obsession of the mind. right? So my mind believes something that's not true, like I can drink safely just before I drink. But of course, once I take a drink or two, my body reacts with a physical craving, demanding more and more and more, and how we're caught in this vicious cycle. There's no way out of it. The mind is destroying the body, and the body is destroying the mind. I'm just absolutely no way out of this thing. And I'm sitting in a big book seminar, and I'm listening to this, and I'm going, holy shit, I'm an alcoholic. Now, I've been in AA for 3 years, or 2.5 at least at the time, and I'm sitting there, I'm going, oh my God. And up until that moment in time, I thought and I believed that I was a crackhead who was going to AA because there were more meetings closer to my home. I promise you that's how I was here. I did not know. And look, this is not, I want to be a little bit careful about here, because I know, to some people I'm stepping on some tradition, but I'm not trying to step on any traditions. This is not every drug addict's story. Not every drug addict is also an alcoholic, right? I happen to be one of those who is. As a matter of fact, I'm sitting here with this new information, pouring through like my history and my past, and I'm going, oh my God, not only am I wrong about how I'm a crackhead in AA, I'm an alcoholic first. I very rarely ever had an obsession to go use drugs. My obsession always started with a drink. And once I started to drink, I would get lit. And once I got lit, there was no telling what I was going to go and do. But and I'm looking at this, I'm going, my God, I've been an alcoholic for a long time. Like I didn't know that. I didn't know I'd been an alcoholic. I mean, I've been an alcoholic at least since I was 16 years old. The only thing that I needed to get a DWI was a driver's license. As soon as I got a driver's license, I got a DWI. I got my second DWI before I ever got my driver's license back from my first one, right? And so, I was one time, not on any drugs whatsoever, I was one time so drunk, apparently, that I dared a cop to arrest me. And he did. He did arrest me. No drugs whatsoever on that occasion. So, right? So I'm looking back at this and I'm going, oh my God, I am an alcoholic. And so one thing that happened is that I understood that I was an alcoholic, and I understood that I was at home in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, that didn't really matter to me very much. But what actually happened, and for the next 20 years, I would have told you that the difference between my recovery before the Big Book Seminar and after the Big Book Seminar was that I found a sponsor who did things out of the Big Book, and we followed the exact directions in here, and that worked for me, and that's the way it's supposed to be. I became one of those Big Book assholes, right? I mean, that's just what happened. That's the danger of going to a Big Book Seminar. You have the potential of becoming one of those guys. Looking back on it now, that was not the difference. The difference, Brian before the Big Book Seminar and Brian after the Big Book Seminar, is for the first time I understood that I was going to die if I didn't find a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity. For the first time, I understood exactly what my problem is, and I understood that as a man in Alcoholics Anonymous, very young man, a boy in Alcoholics Anonymous with a couple of years, that I was going to die. That I had not had this thing that they claim is the answer to alcoholism. They say it's a spiritual experience, right? That's the answer to alcoholism, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. Never mind. Ideas, attitudes, and emotions, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions. That's the solution to alcoholism, right? And I knew as a person that I was absolutely powerless over alcohol, that solution had not occurred yet in my life. Despite the fact that I was sober and I believed in God for all this time, I knew that rearrangement, that spiritual experience, that psychic change had not occurred. And so I was in AA for the first time as somebody who was absolutely powerless over alcohol and was willing to do whatever it took to get out of it, right? I'm 2.5 years sober, maybe 3 years sober, and for the first time, I'm in AA the right way. I'm in AA as somebody who took step one, somebody who is crystal clear about the problem, crystal clear about AA's solution, and standing ready to do whatever it is necessary in order to have a solution. And that just was not the case. That was just not the case until that moment. Until that moment, it just wasn't the case. And so, again, for the next 20 years, I ranted on about how the difference was I finally followed the directions out of the Big Book. Because here's the thing, when I went to a Big Book seminar, I was at step 10 with my sponsor. But I wasn't doing steps like with all the fervor with which the drowning sees a life preserver. Like I wasn't doing it because there was this path that was going to lead me to this new freedom and this new happiness. I was doing it like the kid who went to church on Sundays because his parents made me. People in my group expected me. My sponsor was like, "Hey, have you finished your step?" I was doing it just to kind of like check off the things that were expected of me, not because I understood that I was going to die if I didn't find a spiritual awakening. I did not understand that what it meant to be powerless. And once I got crystal clear about what it meant to be powerless, I was all in on AA Solution. For the first time, I was like, man, whatever's, and everything about my participation in Alcoholics Anonymous changed. Everything. I went to different meetings. I got a new sponsor. I went to all, I was an open discussion meeting junkie. I've gone to enough, I went to enough open discussion meetings in my first 2 years to satisfy me for the rest of my sobriety. I don't go to them anymore. By the way, I don't believe there's anything wrong with an open discussion meeting. I really don't. If the open discussion topic is a topic that's relevant to recovery from alcoholism, that's a great way to have a meeting. It's just that I went to so many of them in the beginning and I found that they did not serve me whatsoever. And again, that's just because of the way we were doing it. A lot of things have changed in AA since then. If you roll back the clock, anybody who's been around for almost 30 years, open discussion meetings were like these mini group therapy sessions. The only problem, and there's nothing wrong with group therapy either, but we were doing it without a qualified therapist. You know what I mean? Like we just took turns playing therapist with each other. It was a recipe for disaster, and it was the blind leading the blind, the sick leading the sick, and so I just changed my meeting schedule. I went to 3 big book meetings a week and 2 step meetings a week and a speaker meeting, and I just changed everything about what I was doing. I became somebody who was a student of Alcoholics Anonymous and wanted to learn all that I could because I understood that AA was going to save my life if I did that. And I guess, I was powerless over alcohol on February 24th, 1988. That story didn't have to go that way. It really didn't. And I don't blame anybody for it. I did for a long time. I blame people in AA for not telling me the truth. I was angry at people in AA for not telling me the truth. But, I still remember some of the things that old timers said back then, and some of them were telling me the truth. I was presented two ideas. I was presented with an idea of, hey, just don't drink and go to meetings and, do that. And I was presented with, no, this is serious business. You got to find God. You got to work the steps. You got to have a spiritual awakening. And given those 2 choices, I did what I always did. What's the least amount that I can do and still get out of this alive? That was my MO my whole life. That's exactly what I did. So I chose that lesser path, right? But now that I understood what it was to be an alcoholic, I was like, no more of that. And I was on a path to real success in Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, that road has bumps in it as well, but those are all bumps that were at least on the right path. So this is going to be a journey through the 12 steps. I'm a literature guy, so I'm going to probably talk a little bit about the Big Book and the 12 and 12 as we go through these next 11 weeks. But I'm also going to share my experience and what I learned, and mostly what I did wrong working the steps. Because really most of my experience comes from having misunderstandings and misconceptions and doing things wrong. I don't know another way to share it, so that's probably what this is going to sound like for 11 weeks. If that sounds interesting to you, join me. If it doesn't, there's lots of great meetings. Thanks for letting me share.